creative is almost just like a hygiene thing. Like you have to be introducing new creative into the account, but using it as like a bet to make to get a better outcome, I think is just like very, very dangerous. But at a certain point, even with like B plus execution, if you have a great offer, you should be able to scale. But if you have an A plus team with a C minus offer, it's probably not going to end well.
Dylan, what's up? Episode 15. Heck yeah.
Let's go.
I'm ready to roll. We're talking D2C turnaround today. This is a topic you want to chat about, Dylan. I think it's an interesting one, and there are several things I can weigh in on as well. But I'm curious if you wouldn't mind kind of setting the stage for some of the conversations you've heard from brands fairly recently that got you thinking about us chatting about D2C turnaround on today's show.
Yeah. So basically, this is inspired by brands coming to us and or experience working with brands where like the target is here and we're way down here. Like it's the delta, the gap is quite large. And oftentimes different operators we work with will have different approaches as to how to go about trying to bridge that gap. And sometimes it's a little bit more obvious than others. But one thing that just like an experience we've had over and over again in the last little bit is going after the opportunities that actually have high enough leverage in the first place to close that gap. So I've kind of put together like a few thoughts on how to go about closing large gaps in performance. I have a gut feel on like how to rank them in terms of leverage or probability of making a large difference to performance. And I'm looking forward to getting your take on this, Jon, and maybe which ones you agree with, disagree with, and the easiest ones, or et cetera, et cetera.
For sure. So when a brand comes to you with this gap between target or where they want to be and where they actually are in terms of advertising performance, before we get into like where they have the most leverage, do you see any like, or do you see any common or like recurring themes of like how they got into the situation in the first place, some of the drivers of that?
Yeah, so first of all, sometimes brands will come to us and we'll actually like flip it back on them and be like, you do not have a problem. So like one thing that we've seen happen like time and time again is, let's say that like the ROAS on new customers 2 years ago was like a 2.5 or something. Okay. And today we're sitting at 1.9. So it's a lot worse than 2 years ago because costs have gone up. And they basically decided to like cut back on spend to preserve some sort of percentage of profitability. And their business has slowly shrunk. There are some cases where the LTV or the gross margin is good enough where it's just like, hey, actually at 1.9, you actually still have a viable business. You just have to start driving more volume, assuming the volume is there, and or fix your whole fixed cost as a percentage thing, because sometimes fixed costs just make too much of a percentage of overall revenue, which we've talked about time and time again. The flip side of that, though, is like they come to us and like they actually have a problem. And oftentimes it can kind of be summarized into two buckets. One is what's like one truth over time that continues to be true and will probably continue to be true is ad costs go up. So either you have to build in higher AOV into your business, and or you have to have LTV to subsidize that over time, or create LTV, and or you have to find better winning products that just have better economics after ad spend so you can still viably work. So sometimes we'll see brands that have just run the exact same funnels essentially for like 4 years, and there's just been this slow gradual decrease in efficiency because cost per click or CPMs have gone up while AOV and CVR have just stayed. Big problem. The flip side of the equation is maybe they've had like one hero product and they've just never tried to diversify into other products. And in my opinion, that's the scariest one, because if you can't really bump up AOV or LTV with the stuff you already sell, and you're just making like bets on new products, that's where you start getting into like high risk territories, in my opinion. But usually you have to go after it with offer, and that's one of my takes for today. But those are probably the most common situations we see.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd say from the finance perspective, if we're talking about like, you know, ad performance turnaround, like brand is like, hey, my ROAS just isn't good enough or it's not where I want it to be. I think there's a lot of alignment between the way that we look at things at Free to Grow and you guys at Aplo in terms of going like, well, hold on, like, how are we defining what a successful ROAS is? And by the way, if you haven't heard the episode where we go through defining all these different terms, go back and listen to that one. But Dylan said something very important, which is, which ROAS are you talking about? Right. So I would even say, I'll take it a step further and say, like, step one is, can we define the metrics the right way first, right? To determine if we've even defined a goal around a metric that makes sense for the business, and then done the breaking out of, like, you know, new customer versus returning customer profitability, really understanding, is there LTV, is there not LTV? And the reason why we have to do that first is because we have to decide which game are we playing. Are we playing the lower first order profit game and make it up on LTV, or are we playing the new customer dominant brand game, which they're different games. Neither one is good or bad. They're different games. And so then once we determine which game we're playing, then we can go determine where the leverage is in terms of what actions we should take to quote, turn around your ROAS. So where do you see the first kind of, like, what's the first level of, like, leverage or low hanging fruit or areas to focus on when you're trying to turn around marketing profitability?
Yeah. So the biggest lever generally is going to be your offer. So that doesn't necessarily have to mean just a straight up discount. It can literally just mean what you sell. Sometimes what we'll go and look at is, if you're a high LTV brand, is there a way to actually drop the first order AOV so your CPA comes down, but then have the replenishment orders be higher value? So basically, if you have an acquisition cost problem, but the LTV of your product is great, meaning like, hey, like, this is clearly a product that once people try, they continue to consume, but CPA, cost of acquisition, has just gotten too high. Can we lower that entry price and then allow that to drop CAC, but then have a similar 12-month LTV by focusing the renewals on subscription or whatever on, like, higher AOV items? So that's one fun kind of tactic. The other one is boosting AOV, kind of going at the alternative approach. And depending on how far off of your target you are, either could be interesting. The increasing AOV one is more common outside of replenishable products. It's more common in, like, just broadly any category, but it's how can I basically incentivize people to buy more, save more? And we're seeing at Aplo this as like a super common strategy this year. It has been for, like, recent years too, but a lot of people are kind of toying around with buy more, save more type models. And I think it's going to become more and more common as CPCs just generally, or CPMs just generally, go up over time. So I'd say offer is probably, in my opinion, the highest leverage one for most brands.
Yeah. So we actually have a really compelling example of a brand that one of our CFOs was working with last year, where she actually helped them determine that offering a steeper discount on first order. And this is a monthly subscription, supplements brand. She was able to help them with some of our cohort modeling to kind of, like, determine some different scenarios to try on, like, subscription opt-in discounts. And we counterintuitively found, or, like, to the brand, it was counterintuitive. They counterintuitively found with our support that increasing the discount, the opt-in discount, to 30% brought CAC down enough to allow us to scale spend and acquire more customers, a higher volume of customers. And the retention was so strong that even though that first order profit was lower per order, it generated, from the LTV velocity over the next several months, it generated quite a bit more profit than keeping that discount lower on the opt-in. Now, for us, I'm curious, actually, like, let's talk about, like, how to do this in practice. Like, in practice, I've seen, brands just do really diligent testing, right? And what we help them do on the modeling side is, like, understand, if this is true, then this is what the outcome would look like financially. If this is true, then this is what the outcome would look like financially. We kind of give them some scenario, like, guardrails, so they can try different discounts or offers on the front end. And we kind of help them understand what would have to be true in LTV for this to pay itself back, or for this to be, successful. And one way that we like to think about it is like, just how quickly does this break even? Because let's just say like the whole test kind of flops overall, but we at least broke even on the test. We didn't lose any money on the bet, right? So those are kind of some ways that we help them with scenario planning to like execute this in practice. But if someone wants to test this, like what are some best practices for finding where that kind of like the right balance is?
You want to make it a pretty big change to your offer. So if you have like a 10% off your first order intro offer and you change it to 15, in my opinion, most likely the potential swing in performance is unlikely to be huge. 15 might be better than 10, but if your goal is to have like a improve your payback speed by, I don't know, 30 or 40% hypothetically, maybe you can get like 2 or 3% better with a small change like that. So first things first is if you're trying to get like a meaningfully different result, you probably need like a meaningfully different tactic or strategy. And then once you've established what those intro offers might be in those situations, you want to also make sure that it doesn't have negative knock-on effects for the LTV side of the piece, or at the very least, you want to make sure that you're accounting for like some risk that there are negative implications. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're giving like a trial pack, but then it renews into like a full-size pack. That first and second renewal after going from trial pack to full-size pack, or however, whether it's subscription or not, might have a higher probability of churn due to customers not having the same pathway as having bought a full-size pack in order one. That still might be a better funnel even if churn is higher, but you have to assume there might be some risk for your historicals not holding up in this funnel. However, after a couple of renewals, the person has shown that there is, intent and ability to consume or use the product at the higher quantity. You might be able to, with more confidence, look at some of your historicals then from the general LTV data. So when you do these kind of first purchase optimized offers, you just have to make sure if you're betting on the LTV, you're taking into account how that first intro offer may impact it, and maybe adjusting your expectations slightly. But first things first is just establishing a fundamentally different enough offer in line with how big of a change in performance you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah. No, I like that. One of the tools that we have that's like really helpful in these scenarios, we have this multi-month cohort. We download all the data from wherever it's stored, Shopify or a Lifetimely or whatever, and we pull it into this Excel template that converts it from revenue to margin dollars, gross margin dollars. And then we have these sensitivity inputs where we can say, like if CAC goes down or up by X%, but then LTV every month goes up or down by 10 or 15%, you can see when that cohort breaks even. And what allows you to do is what you're talking about is like sit down with this model and say like, hey, our assumption is by going from a 5% opt-in discount to a 30% opt-in discount, CAC is going to move down 20%, but we also think that LTV is going to come down 10% because the way this offer is structured, we're probably not going to have as strong LTV as we have historically, and the historical data is feeding the baseline. And what it allows you to do is see which month you break even, and you can mess with these sensitivity inputs to like get a sense of these guardrails and then place the bet, right? And so it's just really, but I think from a financial planning standpoint, what I want to make sure people hear, and I'm sure you agree, is like, there's not a silver bullet forecast or prediction, right? We're talking about running what if scenarios and just being okay that like the scenarios we believe that could play out, we're okay placing the bet within those possible outcomes. But we're ultimately trying to get a test where we learn and say, and prove this looks like the relationship. And then we'll scale from there if the relationship is what is something good. Do you agree?
Yeah. I totally agree. And I also want to like give like some rough guardrails as to how we think about these funnels when making suggestions on them and like with our clients. And if your LTV increases by 100% or more in year one, sometimes going for lower AOV order one to drive down acquisition cost in relation to lifetime value can make sense. But for the vast majority of brands, you have to go for first order AOV, or you practically have to, if you want to try and improve like the economic position or reality of your pre-existing funnels. So I'd say like the lower AOV exists for like traditionally CPG or some sort of like highly replenishable product. Whereas for most brands, it's how do you basically do buy more, save more. And the last couple months for me, I have like this growing opinion that like just more brands should have some sort of a buy more, save more function. One of the other kind of levers I have is like unit economics, and it kind of gets into offer too, but like there's just so many instances where the more you kind of stack in one order, the better that is for unit economics on a per order basis for so many brands. And I just think it makes more and more sense from an AOV standpoint and a variable like logistics cost standpoint to try and really incentivize customers to buy in larger quantities. And I've seen a lot of brands do that well this year too. I just have like great breakthroughs. Now you have to figure out what offer makes sense for the incentivization structure, and the actual implementation of that on site is actually one of the more difficult things to do well. I've seen some very like janked solutions, for lack of better terms, to try and facilitate like buy more, save more bundling. So it's easier when people just buy more of the same thing from a UI standpoint. When you have people like, I want that product and that product and that product, it gets a little bit more difficult to actually roll out on site, maybe requires some custom work. But I'm curious your thoughts there with like the intersect of unit economics and offer, and if you've seen that be like a critical talking point or strategy to deploy.
Yeah, for sure. So I was actually recording an episode of the Free to Grow CFO podcast right before this, and was actually talking with a guy who was talking about something similar, that he's seen this bundling or buy more, save more strategy becoming increasingly important for brands today. And he asked me, he said a lot of brand founders are actually really scared that buy more, save more is basically, devaluing their brand in the eyes of the consumer. And he asked me if I agreed. I was like, no, I see that like, as long as there's true value, like it's about the value that they feel is being delivered, and buy more, save more, if done right, actually should feel like it's delivering a lot more value. And it definitely, and I believe that it doesn't devalue the brand. I think that's much different than site-wide sales, or just like, like strike through price that's permanent, and it's like really, really heavy strike through price discount, right? Buy more, save more it's a value proposition, right? And so
I totally agree.
But going back to what you're talking about, how it's not just how it's presented on site, but just the way it's messaged, it needs to be presented as an increase in value. Right. And then I believe that doesn't devalue your brand. I think it's also super important. Where I see it being super important is for brands that have a product that if they sold just one unit, and maybe this is a good segue into talking more about unit economics, but like there's just not enough gross margin dollars per order to like actually scale ad spend. Right. And so I have seen several now. Let me be clear, and I think Dylan was alluding to this as well. You don't just randomly do buy more, save more on like whatever freaking product you have, right? Like it's got to be thoughtful. It's that it makes sense to a consumer for the product that you're selling to, go ahead and buy 3 instead of 1 or 5 instead of 3, right? So like it all comes back to understanding your customer and how they consume what you sell, right? You can't just get everybody to do buy more, save more on every type of product, right? Like I have a brand that I work with that sells really, really high-end fire pits, and for them to go try to sell 3 fire pits at once for a discount is not feasible. But their first order AOV is like $850, much different than a brand that is selling something with a $20 AOV that you may actually buy a couple times over a 6 to 12 month period, but hey, let me just buy all 4 of them right now for, buy more, save more. So the point being, understand the customer, understand how your product gets consumed, make sure it makes sense, right? But yeah, I see it most commonly used well in a product that people do typically consume more than 1 unit over time, but the AOV or the gross margin dollars of a single unit it's really tough for a brand to make that work. to cover ad spend as they're trying to scale.
Yeah, and I think like the consumption ones are the easiest because like you can always make the argument to like bulk it, even if it's going to take you longer to consume it if there's value there. I think there's also like this like middle ground, like even like brands that you don't necessarily need to buy in bulk, like not brands, like categories like apparel. Like I think that like even in those situations, you will still sometimes see people naturally purchasing more than one good, and they don't necessarily need to. It's not like a guarantee they're going to consume more, but you can still kind of incentivize that bulk purchasing. And I think there's just like many instances where it can make sense to really think about that. And I think again, to your point, it comes down to like understanding like in theory, not only what does it do to like the relationship between with return on ad spend, between conversion rate on site, AOV, cost per click, etc. It could just alone have a positive impact there. But I've seen some pretty crazy instances on like shipping costs where like if you just whether you ship 2 of these things, 3 of these things, 4 of these things, 5 of these things, when you start looking at what that does to my variable cost or my variable margin after those expenses, it's like a completely different business in some cases, and not always, but like it can make a huge difference to the targets that are needed.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example, and then we'll turn to talking about unit economics next. In apparel, like I've seen a brand who deployed this strategy, and we're like, hey, look, if you buy a shirt and pants and a hat and socks, so it's actually kind of like you're just it's an entire outfit. Yeah. Buy more, save more, right? But they determined that journey of like buying a whole outfit was something that their customer wanted, right? And so it wasn't just random. There was thought behind it and deploying that strategy. So let's talk about unit economics next in terms of like what kind of leverage do you see brands having in their unit economics for trying to turn around their marketing performance?
Yeah, I mean, like one is what we just chatted about. So like how to think about how what you sell actually impacts your unit economics when it comes to your variable costs. And then the other is just like, we've also seen instances where like we've worked with brands where they've had the same gross margins for a very long time. And as acquisition costs have gone up or return on ad spend on acquisition has maybe gone down over the last, 5 years or whatever, they've never actually like meaningfully gone to the table and renegotiated that. Maybe they're doing way more volume than they used to. And it's almost like they waited until it started to really hurt before they thought about going to do those things. So on your side, Jon, like, do you have any like best practices on like how you would think about going to suppliers or vendors on how you can think about getting better costs?
So you should go to your 3PL like at least annually. And if you're growing really fast, you might be able to go a couple times a year, but like whoever you're doing your shipping and fulfillment, you should revisit that annually, especially if you're growing. Absolutely. And even if your maybe growth has stagnated a little bit, I think you should still reassess your pricing on an annual basis, because there may be other things on the shipping side outside of just like being able to throw your weight around because you're growing and getting lower rates. Maybe it's talking to them about specific processing and handling fees they have, or storage charges, or even looking at, do you have your inventory placed in the right optimal warehouses, which could make a huge impact. So you definitely want to revisit the relationship with your 3PL on or your carrier if you're direct fulfilling, if you're self-fulfilling, on an annual basis. And then, with your materials and or finished goods suppliers, you definitely want to do that as well. And like the thing is, when you're growing, what you have to realize is that you have something that the vendor wants, which is like they want commitments or guidance on the quantities that you're going to give them, right? And so there's various strategies. There's actually like signing commitments and saying, I'm going to give you a minimum amount of volume if you meet certain conditions in exchange for price concessions. But I would also say too, this is where like making sure you have like truly like a financial professional on your team, is you want to be careful to not just beat them up big time on the unit economics or the per unit cost without also weighing what do you want to get out of your payment terms, which is the cash conversion cycle or the cash flow side of things. Because if you go too hard on one, it can be harder to win on the other, right? And so like you need to have the ability to assess your forward-looking cash forecast as much as your P&L forecast so that you can determine which you should prioritize. Because oftentimes where I see the best negotiations with like actual product suppliers is coming to the table with like what you want to get out of the cash conversion cycle piece, which is your payment terms and improving those, and coming up with the minimum what you want to get on per unit costs and using them as bargaining chips for one another and just trying to come up with the best holistic kind of restructuring of the arrangement between the two of those and not over optimizing on one at the expense of the other. Because you may find, I'll give you an example. Let's say, just to use easy math, let's say you can save $1 on every unit. You sell 1,000 units. And so that's $1,000. But let's say that you left on the table potentially improving your payment terms by 30 days. And that would have actually improved your cash flow by $1,100 on a monthly average. That means that you possibly left $100 of that. Like you exchanged $1,100 of cash flow for $1,000 on the P&L. Is one right or wrong? I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but understanding your cash flow forecast versus your P&L forecast will help you determine which of those is more important, right? And you can say, hey, look, I'm going to give here, but I need you to give here. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
That makes complete sense. And I guess like, how would you advise or help a brand decide which to prioritize between like the P&L piece or the cash flow piece? Because I can think of some examples where like I would be like the payment terms all the way. Like if the P&L is already in a pretty decent spot, like basically the biggest block to grow is the cash to buy the inventory. So terms are like the biggest point of leverage. And then I also see where like the P&L is like not the healthiest. So before we even think about like cash flow growth or what as that bottleneck, obviously you always have to think about it. It's like you really have to worry about the P&L. Is there any like general rules of thumb, or how do you kind of think about balancing those two?
So I think what you have to do is you have to size up the opportunity of each. Like for example, let's talk about sizing up the opportunity on the cash flow impact. What you're really going to look at is basically the average days of your inventory that are being financed by your vendors. It's called a DPO or AP days payables outstanding. You need to look at different revenue forecast expectations. If you get an extra 10 days from your supplier or 15 days or 30 days, there's a way to mathematically calculate on average how much of your cash flow are they floating for you at these different sales scenario, like in these different sales scenarios. So you size up that, and then you go size up what you think is feasible to get on a price reduction, right, of your cost, and look at that across your volume for the same period that you're sizing up the cash conversion cycle impact of getting better terms, and you compare them. Like, because sometimes just that simple exercise, it might even sound like overly simplistic, but oftentimes they're nowhere even close to one another. And it's pretty obvious how much of an impact one might make versus the other. So like, I think that's the starting point. The second thing is like, you have to assess cash flow, generally speaking, tends to matter more and more the more volatility there is, or the more the peaks and valleys of your working capital are expanding and contracting over a 12-month period. So things that drive that, seasonality. If you're a much higher seasonal brand and you don't already have access to good sources of debt capital for inventory financing, that may be pushing you on the side of the spectrum of like the payment terms are more important, right? So like, again, it's about like coming up with simple heuristic models to use to just size up the maximum impact of the P&L improvement versus the cash flow improvement. And you can pretty quickly see which one's going to move the needle more for you. But again, you also have to establish where your weaknesses and risks are. There's some brands that come to us because of their personal banking relationship, they just have like a really legit line of credit in place. And I'm like, I don't know how the heck you got that. You must have a PG. and they could take your house and all your personal assets, but you've got it. So that's just not a concern for them. So they're going to go for the jugular on the price like negotiation, right? So figure out where your risk exposures are and where you're weak. And you probably want to try to solve for that like first before the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
So, okay, I'm dying to get to creative because creative is like an area to focus on, just because I think that creative, I don't know, it may not feel like this to you, maybe it does. To me, it feels like one of those things where like brands just throw that word around like, oh yeah, like if our creative was better, our advertising would be better. And like at the end of the day, I know there's a lot more to doing creative well, right? And so where, like, what comes to mind when you start thinking through advising a brand on like how to turn around their marketing performance through creative?
Yeah, so there are occasionally brands we come across where you'll look at their account and like, I don't even know what to assign it, like the number of like quality assets that have been launched in the last 12 months, but it's very, very few. And it's like, okay, like you actually have like a fair chance that, you know, your creatives are not good. There's definitely room for improvements. And what that is very subjective though going into it, because it's very difficult to estimate what the impact of an ad is going to be. But like fair enough, if you're trying to get like 10% better improvement and your creative historically has been very subpar, maybe that's an opportunity on the table. Way more often, we will get we will see a brand that basically has a pre-existing team that is churning out in our opinion, high volume of either good or really good creative, and the brand owner is like, yeah, I've maybe like 30-40% improvement if we just do creative better. And like in all probability, that is not a good bet to make. Maybe there is upside, but this goes back to like expectations of like what's possible with a specific lever. If you've been around for like 5+ years and you've launched like hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of ads for a specific product or offer, the probability of you getting like a substantially better outcome on creative alone is just quite low. If your target is like incremental improvements, maybe there's an opportunity there depending on the historical creative execution. But creative is almost just like a hygiene thing. Like you have to be introducing new creative into the account to be performing at where you want to be. But using it as like a bet to make to get a better outcome, I think is just like very, very dangerous. It's one of my least favorite levers to pull. You got to pull it. It's like you have to be doing it, but it's just unlikely to give you a home run. It's like a base hit for another analogy.
Well, and I feel like I'm sensing that we have the same experience. Like I hear too many brands think like, oh, we'll just fix the creative. It's a silver bullet. I see it come about as the silver bullet to fixing advertising performance more often than it should. And again, by the way, I'm not devaluing the importance of creative. I just think I think there's a lot of agencies, contractors, people who will sell to you like, hey, we'll fix your creative and you're good to go. And it feels good to come up with that simple of an answer to a problem that's really stressing you out. Right.
Yeah. So like, I'll throw something in just as well on this thought. Like, I actually think that many brands, maybe not most, many brands underspend on creative. So like, I think that like people underestimate the value of having a high volume of creative and this high quality launched into an account every month. And oftentimes as ad spend scales, the budget for creative does not scale proportionally. And I do think that we see a lot of accounts that do not invest enough into the creation of net new assets. Having said that, while that's a call out, I don't think you can say the same about it's like the best lever to improve performance when it's not good enough, because it's just not a high probability bet. Like if you think about like ad hit rates for what is a winning ad, even great advertisers will have a horrendous hit rate. Like not many ads actually do well. The majority of the ads we launch at Aplo, they suck. They do not perform even close to baseline expectation. And it's like, there's like a small percentage that actually do. So it's like, again, it's just like two different things. It's like, you got to do it and you should always be trying to be be doing better at it, but like using it as your having that be the thing that you think will change your business and turn your brand around, way too risky for me.
Totally agree. Okay, so I'm dying to talk about this last one here because this is another one that comes up as a silver bullet and it's definitely important, but execution. So where does execution lie on the spectrum of like leverage, like how much leverage a brand can get out of that when turning around their ad spend performance? And I'll even say a little bit further, it'd be great if you could touch on like some common misconceptions about what execution can and can't fix, because I think that comes up constantly.
Yeah, that's the reason I put that there is because being like in a marketing agency land, we'll occasionally come across like a client that has maybe gone through like, I don't know, 5 agencies in the last 2 years, or like 6 teams, in-house agency, contractor, freelance, like the sheer number. And it's like at a certain point, like, and like we can audit accounts and stuff. So like we'll see like sometimes these accounts are actually previously run very well by like very competent individuals or teams. And it's like at a certain point, there's not going to just be like a different, like, there's only so many things you can do with the same offer, unit economics, and creative. Like if you're just going to keep pushing that same thing, the probability of something changing is like slim to none. So like go back, go to the high leverage things and start there. And then at the end of the day, it's almost like signal versus noise. Like horrible execution can prevent a business from going to anywhere remotely good. But at a certain point, even with like B+ execution, if you have a great offer, you should be able to scale. Now you can then take great execution, A+ execution, and turn it up to another level and create like really great incremental yield by having that like A+ team in place. But if you have an A+ team with a C- offer, it's probably not going to end well. So it just comes back down to, again, understanding that the execution and the team behind the business can be a huge difference maker, but it can't necessarily fix something that is broken. You have to revisit the thing that is the fundamental leverage point.
Okay, so I think this is related. Tell me if you think I'm crazy, but like this kind of reminds me a little bit of like Warren Buffett. He has this like classic kind of like concept. I don't know if it's actually, there's a quote somewhere I could find, but like he advises on investing in businesses that are like so simple and durable that even an idiot could run them successfully because eventually one will be in charge, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever heard that. I don't know if you ever heard that Warren Buffettism before, but I think the point he's making is that the business has very strong fundamentals somewhere that like, yes, execution can certainly squeeze additional value out of it, but there are these fundamental building blocks of business that this business just has that are really, really good. And poor management versus excellent management don't change those things. And I think of that same kind of metaphor with what you're talking about here, is that like, it's not that execution isn't important, but all the execution in the world can't fix some of these key fundamentals that you've laid out here, like offer, unit economics, creative. If those things are really like, actually, dude, I've seen numerous examples of brands that just have decent offer, decent creative, unit economics, crush it, and like just decent execution, and they kill it because the unit economics are just so dang good. Right now, eventually what happens, economic theory says competition, like competitors see like, why are these guys getting, above market unit economics? They compete down those unit economics. The offer and the creative have to sharpen, right? And so like you
eventually you need the execution.
Exactly. But like the point being that like the execution in and of itself will not save the day, right? You've got to really think about those other things. So I think it's great that you laid those out beforehand. I mean, look, man, I think this is really practical and helpful stuff because, quite frankly, I think everybody, there's so many podcasts you can go out there to like listen to like how to crush it in D2C. But the reality is like, man, so often I come across brands who are like, hey man, we don't feel like we're crushing it and we need someone's help to improve things. And so I feel like this is a very real topic that we've talked about here today. Do you have any final thoughts for anyone who's thinking through turning around the performance of their advertising?
Yeah, I'd say that like make sure the action you take is proportional to the gap you're trying to close. As in like if you using your best judgment, and that can have some like variety based off of experience, but if you're trying to get a 30-40% improvement, that is huge. So you have to do something really big to your offer and funnel to actually even have a chance of yielding that. So make sure you're kind of matching the change you want with the types of changes you're making to your funnel.
Dude, that's damn good advice. And I would say my final thoughts, just remember, like we talked about earlier, to assess not just the P&L impacts, right? Because usually poor performance is by and large a P&L viewpoint, a P&L perspective from the as far as the brands are concerned, but also work to understand the cash flow impact, because you want to make sure that you have the cash flow that's needed to execute on this turnaround. So anyways, episode 15 in the books. That was a good one, man.
Yes, sir.
Until next time, let's go.
Yeah.